Welcome to the channel. This is our next segment of Scientology stories. No matter how you first heard about Scientology, we hope you will learn from these stories and that along the way we can educate you on the language and practices of Scientology. And here's my important note. Whether you are currently in Scientology, an ex-Scientologist, or just curious about Scientology, the bottom line is Scientology does not want you to hear these stories. So thank you for watching, listening, sharing, and helping us to educate people on the true nature of Scientology. With that, I am going to welcome my guest for today. This is a dear friend of ours, Jeff Hawkins, who spent 37 years in Scientology, and I will now welcome him to the stream. Welcome, Jeff.
Hey, Claire, thanks for having me.
Of course, my pleasure. Thank you for your time today. I greatly appreciate it.
No problem.
Well, should we get started with launching into how you got into Scientology?
Okay. Yes, I was not born in Scientology. I volunteered. That was not a good thing, but it seemed like a good idea at the time.
I understand.
I was living in Southern California. I had finished college, and I was working in LA as what they called in those days a commercial artist. Nowadays, it's called a graphic designer, which is what I still am, basically.
Yes.
And I had sort of become a hippie in college. I think you've got a picture of me at that time with long hair.
Yes, I can pull that up here for reference. Here we go. There you go.
Yes, that's me in front with long hair, looking a little like Brian Jones. And yeah, that's my college buddies behind me. So I was kind of living the hippie lifestyle. I lived in Sierra Madre Canyon, which is a little canyon. I think it's about 15 miles northeast of LA.
Yes.
In the foothills. And it was probably the largest hippie community outside of Haight-Ashbury. It was all kinds of kids were living there, and it was a nice place to live at the time. And it was the kind of place where you didn't have to lock your doors day or night. You know, people came and went, and it was just a very trusting and friendly environment.
Yes.
And a friend of mine came dashing in one day, and he said, "Oh, have you heard about Scientology?" And I'm like, "Oh, tell me what it's all about." He had gone to a sort of an impromptu intro lecture. There were two guys had come up from LA, from the LA org, up to the canyon, and they had held court in somebody's house and given a lecture on Scientology. And one of the people was, what's his name? Mike Maurer, and a lot of old timers will recognize that name, Phoebe
Yes.
Maurer's son.
Yes.
And Mike was only like 15 at the time.
Wow.
But he came up with a guy from LA org. And they gave a little intro lecture, and my friend Jerry was at the lecture, and he was all excited about it. Scientology, and this is a new thing. And it was very timely because a lot of people were looking for something spiritual at the time. There were a lot of gurus and, the Beatles were getting into spiritual stuff. And I mean, it was just sort of the zeitgeist of the time.
Yes. And of course, at that time, was it presented as a religion or no?
It was what?
Was it presented as a religion?
Um, it was presented sort of like a cross between religion and science,
Okay.
a scientific spiritual study,
Okay.
you know, which I thought sounded great, at the time. So me and Jerry and my brother Kimball all went down to the LA org um, the next Monday and went to the intro lecture. And it was a very different scene for Scientology back then. We walked into the LA org, and I think you have a picture of it
Yes, let me get
at
that.
the time. Big old two-story house down on 9th Street in Los Angeles. Yeah,
There we go.
nice fountain in the front and everything. And we went into the reception area, or to the what would have been the living room, I guess, of the house when it was a house. But it was a big reception area, and there were like 60 people there, all talking and excited, and old people, young people. It was just amazing. It's something you don't see in orgs nowadays.
Right.
Um, they're empty now, but then it was like 60 people in the reception area. And then I went into the intro lecture, and there was 100 people in the audience.
Wow. And how old were you at this time?
I was I was 20, 21.
Okay.
Um, and they were pulling in 100 people every night to the intro lecture, and they were getting 100% re-signs onto course,
Wow.
which was amazing. The lecturer they had, a guy named Seton Thomas, was a very good lecturer. He was kind of a Tony Robbins type guy. He was good looking, very articulate, very excited about the subject. And so he would lecture for a while and then show a clip of the black and white movie with LRH and Tony Hitchman.
Yes.
And so it was him lecturing, and then the film, and then him lecturing a bit more, and then a bit more of the film,
Okay.
which turned out to be a very effective thing. And then he explained clear, what clear was.
Okay. The
And then
state of clear, which of course is the first big major achievement on the bridge to total freedom in Scientology.
That's right. No reactive mind,
Right.
And so we were all like, wow, he's clear. And then he it was like he looked at every member of the audience and he says, I'm clear. You can be clear too.
Mm.
And everybody was like, like that,
Yes.
So
So he had you hooked, in other words.
He had the entire audience hooked, which
right.
Apparently he did every night,
Wow.
So, and the thing was, in those days, when I first got in, any Scientologist could give an impromptu intro lecture on the spur of the moment, and it was kind of cool thing to be a Scientologist, It was like, the next thing, the next big thing.
Yes.
So nobody was shy about it. In fact, I had a bumper sticker on my car that said, "Ask me about Scientology," which I can't even imagine today's Scientologists doing.
Right.
Ask me about Scientology. And I literally had people pull me over and say, tell me, what's it all about?
Wow. So it was effective.
Yeah, it was effective. And everybody was talking about it. Everybody was excited about it, This was before all the later dirty tricks and FBI raids and all that sort of thing. So we had no back off at all on telling people about Scientology.
Yes.
So I decided that I wanted to help Scientology, and I was a graphic designer at that point, a commercial artist, and they used to send me their magazine, which was called Reality, and it was horribly laid out. It was badly designed. It was just really atrocious. And I thought, well, I'm a designer. I'll go down and help them lay out the magazine. So I went to the Dissensec at the LA org, and I asked him if I could, help lay out the magazine for them, make it better. And he said fine, and he led me into the back area there at the org, and he handed me these shooting boards that they had received from Worldwide. And it was camera ready art, and all they had to do was plug in their addresses and their success stories and whatever was unique to their org, and all the articles and ads were already made. And I said, well, this is where the problem is at Worldwide. Whoever's putting these shooting boards together doesn't know what they're doing.
And what was Worldwide?
Worldwide was the international headquarters of Scientology at the time, and it was at St. Hill Manor in England.
Understood.
And I had visited England a year before. I had been taking my semester abroad at university, and had been in England and hitchhiked all over England and Scotland and Wales, and so I loved England, and so I thought, well, great, it'd be great to go over there and live and help Scientology and do what I like, which is design work and art and that sort of thing. So I thought, oh, this is all coming together,
Yes.
So me and my brother and two friends of ours, we set out for England. And they warned us. They said, you can't carry in any Scientology literature into England because they were turning Scientologists away because there had been an inquiry in England and so forth. So they would have turned us away. And in fact, one of the friends that went with us had a Scientology book in his luggage, and he was turned back.
Oh, wow.
And he had to return to the U.S. And I didn't see him again until actually I got out of Scientology many years later. But so the three of us went down to St. Hill, and we asked them where the publications organization was, and they said, oh, they moved up to Edinburgh. So we're like, oh, okay. And they were saying, but it's okay, you can join staff here at St. Hill. And I was like, no, I wanted to go to the publications organization. So and I said, so where is Worldwide? And finally somebody directed us to the manor, and we found a lady there in a full naval uniform, a Sea Org member who was Worldwide staff at the time, Peggy something. And she said, oh yeah, they're up in Edinburgh. And so we got on the train, went up to Edinburgh, and we finally found the publications organization, which was in an alley off of an alley. There was Thistle Street Lane was in back of Queen Street, where the org was. The Scotland org was on Queen Street, and then the next street over was Thistle Street.
Okay, and I have a picture your picture of this. I'll pop that in here.
Oh yeah,
there we go.
So we finally found the place, and here it is.
Yeah.
Publications Organization Worldwide on Thistle Street Lane. And you can see it's cobblestones there.
Yes.
And we used to see horses coming down there, cloppity clop, with, dragging a cart of some kind. So it was, for me, it was quite picturesque,
Yes.
but that was
and quite the trek to finally find it too.
yeah, and great to be able to find it. And I had, I was all prepared. I had a complete portfolio of my design work, because I thought I would have to sell them on hiring me.
Yes.
But they were just, oh, you're here for a job? Yeah, sit down here. So we were welcomed to
Nice.
Pubsorg, and I began. I was the designer, and so I began designing the magazines and doing all that, which was good. That was good work.
And were you in the Sea organization yet at this point?
No.
Okay.
Pubsorg was not Sea Org at that time.
I see. Okay.
That came later. For a while, it was being run by a Sea Org mission, and I had my first taste of Sea Org discipline.
What was that like for you as someone new in Scientology?
It was just horrible.
Mm.
We couldn't sleep. This was when the stats were down. We couldn't sleep. We had to catch a few hours sleep among the book stocks if we could. If you were in treason or below, then there was an elevator that went down to the basement, and there wasn't even any space down there. There was just the elevator, the space the elevator was in, and you had to live down there if you were in treason or below.
Wow, and treason, of course, being the ethics conditions in Scientology.
Yeah, and if you were in liability, you had to wear a chain around your arm.
Wow.
I mean, it was just, it was totally draconian. And at that time, on the ship, they were doing overboardings. This was in '68, when the Class 8 course was being run by Hubbard.
And of course, by overboarding, you mean the practice of throwing staff members into the waves to purge them of their sins so they can arise a better being?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. On the ship, they were throwing them in the harbor, which was not clean water.
Ouch. Yeah.
There were oil slicks on it and trash from the ships, and it just, it was not a good experience. And it wasn't. So the missionaire, Doreen Casey, decided that the equivalent for us would be to go out and back in the alley and put the offending person up against the wall and throw buckets of water at them.
Wow.
So that was overboarding. So I got thoroughly sick of this way of, running the place. And about that time, the OEC FEBC program started aboard the Apollo, which was Organization Executive Course, which was the study of all policy, and the Flag Executive Briefing Course, which was supposed to be this big breakthrough in running orgs.
Yes.
It was the product officer, organizing officer system, which was basically that the product officer was just, a pile driver, just insisting on getting the stats up, and was, unreasonably, not taking any excuses. And then the org officer would run along behind them and make sure that the people had their hatting, that they were trained on what they had to do, that they had everything they needed to produce, and so forth. And this was an interesting pattern, and it was supposed to be this huge breakthrough. I never saw it actually work.
Right.
But this was how things were supposed to go. And the heroes at the time were Kerry Gleason, Bill Franks, and God, who was the third one? His name has now escaped me. Were these three guys that had boomed Boston Org at the time.
Okay.
They were big heroes and big opinion leaders. And But the way they did it was what was known as stat pushing.
Right.
Which meant just getting the stat any way you could, including false reporting or, keeping people up day and night, cruel treatment of staff. All of that sort of stuff was going on. That was the unreasonable product officer
right.
idea, which, it led to a lot of abuse. It led to a lot of staff abuse. And
as
criminality
as a long-term pattern in Scientology.
It's a long-term pattern, yeah. And you even see a hint of that at the Ent base, where Dave Miscavige was the pile-driving, unreasonable product officer, and he would do anything to get things done, including beat up staff.
Right.
And then Shelley was acting as the org officer. She would come along behind and see if people had their training, were they getting audited, and so forth. And so she was like the good cop.
Right. And Miscavige was always a very good bad cop in that scenario.
He was always the bad cop, yeah.
Right.
So this was this new breakthrough in how you were supposed to run things, which of course was a horrible way to run things.
Right.
And it would result in criminality, because a big part of it was false reporting the stats.
Yes.
False reporting they were up when they were not.
Yes.
And this became a big deal in later years. Munich Org was a huge example of that.
Yes.
They had been false reporting their stats for years, and then they were reporting huge income.
Right. You're referring to in the late 80s and early 90s when they actually were awarded St. Hilside's org and won the birthday game.
I think that was the time. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then it turned out it was all false reports.
Right.
Because the money they were sending up the line to reserves didn't match the income that they were reporting. So a mission was sent, investigated, found out all their stats were false.
Yes.
And being falsely reported.
Yes. So definitely created a pattern. But so back to where you were. So you were saying the OEC was coming out, and it was being done on the Apollo.
Yeah. And every org had to send a command team of 3 people to Flag for training.
Okay.
And my wife Tina and I were chosen, along with another guy, to be the command team.
All right. Tina, and here I'll pop in the picture that you provided of you and Tina.
Yeah, this was back before any of that happened. That was my first wife, Tina.
Okay.
And we look very happy in that picture. This was in Copenhagen.
Okay.
And I don't think we went over the move to Copenhagen.
Oh yes, you're right. Go ahead with that. Let's fill in that hole we skipped over.
Yeah, a plot hole. How did we get to Copenhagen? Well, it was thought that the British government was going to seize the book stocks. And we had 5 stories of book stocks, tons and tons of books. And it was feared that the government was going to seize the book stocks as they had in Australia.
Okay, and this is you're in Edinburgh at this time, right? Okay.
Yeah, we're still in Edinburgh. And so it was like, oh, okay, Pubs has got to get out of the UK. So big panic. We had to pack up the org, the entire org, including 5 stories of book stocks on shelves. And we had a week to get out of town.
Wow.
And so they pulled these big container trucks into the alley, and we started just putting all of the books into boxes and packing them into these containers. And I think there's a photo of us
Yes, here,
packing the
I'll
books
add that
into the
here. There we
containers.
go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Uh,
That's a
and
lot of book stock.
yeah. And there was about 6 of these container trucks full of books. And you can see they're just packed into cornflakes boxes and everything else.
Yes.
And a lot of people will know the guy on the left is Foster Tompkins. And that's where I first met Foster. We became friends.
Wow.
The guy in the middle is Ron Biggs, who was the auditor editor.
Okay.
And that's his son, Nathan, helping us out.
Okay.
And the guy on the right is John Sanborn, who was with Hubbard in the 1950s. And a really great guy. And he had all kinds of fascinating stories about Hubbard in Phoenix in, 53, 54.
Wow.
So there we are, packing everything up. And so we did. It took us a week of no sleep and hard physical labor. And we got all the books packed in. And then we had one more container and we packed all of the furniture and file cabinets and everything else into that one. And we took off. And the crew flew into Copenhagen. And Copenhagen was chosen because it was felt that the government would not be oppressive, that they would be more tolerant of Scientology.
Understood.
So we went into Copenhagen, and Tina and I were together at that point. And a couple of weeks after we arrived, we got married. And I think I mentioned she had a baby. She had a little baby, Gwen.
Okay.
Who is my stepdaughter and still is my stepdaughter.
Awesome.
And so we took baby Gwen and went to Copenhagen. And there wasn't any place to live in town. And we finally rented a farm up in the north end of the island in a town called Gilleleje. And it was an old farmhouse, and we settled in there. There was like tons of rooms, bedrooms and stuff. So we settled in there, and we had an old bus that we took into town every day to work.
Yep.
So so that went on, and that's when this missionaire arrived. After we got to Copenhagen, this missionaire, Doreen Casey, arrived and was running roughshod over the whole of pubs.
And she was a member of the Sea Organization.
She was a Sea Org officer, yeah.
Okay.
And she was just a holy terror. I mean, she was running roughshod over the crew, and she instituted the overboarding by throwing water on the person. And it was a rough time.
Understood.
And then the org exec course, flag executive briefing course program started on the Apollo. And it was like, okay, every org has to send 3 people. So the 3 people from the Pups org were myself, my wife, Tina, and another guy named Lance. And we all went to flag. And this was in the beginning of 1971.
Okay.
And we were there for, I think, 5-6 months. And we all did the org exec course and the flag executive briefing course.
And that was on the Apollo, which we have a picture of here?
On the Apollo, yes.
There we go.
We got the pictures.
Yes.
And so that was good. That was exciting. And I actually met Hubbard.
Tell me about that. What were your impressions?
I will tell you the story that I mentioned before about. I was a kid. I was 21, 22 years old at that point, and there was one day that I had, we were all on A deck, which was the VIP deck. A deck was like the highest deck, and above that was the Commodore's research room and his living quarters and so forth.
Yes. And of course, so, Commodore meaning Hubbard.
Meaning Hubbard, he was the Commodore.
You know? Right.
And so I had left my course pack in our cabin, which was on A deck. And so I was racing up because I didn't want to be late for course. I was racing up, burst into the A deck corridor there, and there was Hubbard with all of his aides around him, Commodore staff aides. And they all turned around. Here was this kid barging through this door and making a lot of noise. And Hubbard just gave me this big smile, and he said, "Well, hello there." And I raced off to my room, and I was like, "He talked to me. He just talked to me." Ah. And of course, I got in a lot of trouble for that. Not from Hubbard, but from the aides who thought I was just, horrible for racing around and bursting in on his conference like that.
Right.
So but so that was my first encounter with Hubbard, and I remember being surprised at how tall he was. Because he was a portly man. He was not skinny at all, but he had the height to match. So it was almost like if you took a normal sized person and just blew them up. He was tall and big around, and he had a big head, and so he was just a large person, and he had a commanding presence. Even if you didn't know who he was, if he walked into a room, all attention would go to him because he filled a room.
Yeah.
And he was a great storyteller. And he had a great sense of humor, which was kind of self-depreciating at times. And so he had a lot of charisma,
Yeah.
And he had a commanding presence, so like I say, if he walks into a room, the attention goes on him, and if he says do X, then everybody does X,
Right.
So he had that kind of a presence. So anyway, so we finished our training, Org Exec course, Flag Executive Briefing course, fired back to pubs, myself as commanding officer. But before we left, we joined the Sea Org.
And how did that come about?
Every single student on board joined the Sea Org because it was just the thing to do,
Yeah.
I was sat down by, I think it was the first mate, Sue Pomeroy. And she says, "What are your plans for the next billion years?" And I was like, "I don't know." And she said,
"You didn't have that planned yet, Jeff?"
No, I did not have that planned out, even though I was running a lot of whole track stuff, because all of the FEBC students were getting the L rundowns, which had just been released.
Okay.
So I was getting my L rundowns from an auditor named Otto Roos, who's kind of notorious in Sea Org history.
Yeah, and by the way, how would you describe the L rundowns?
It was like it's more like a whole track sec check. It was all about getting off whole track overts.
And of course, by whole track meaning prior millions of years of existence, right? Yeah,
millions of years ago and so forth. So, but it's basically running overts and withholds on the whole track.
Yeah.
And that was supposed to release the power of the Phaeton and so forth,
Yes,
And,
understood.
it was interesting. So I was running all of that stuff. So then when Sue asked me my plans for the next billion years, I was kind of in that zone already, this billion year zone, like, okay. And then I was like, well, no, I got no plans. So I signed up, billion year contract, and fired back to pubs as commanding officer of
And your
pubs.
wife joined at the same time.
And she joined at the same time. We all joined the Sea Org.
Okay.
And went back to pubs. And so my first post in the Sea Org was as commanding officer of an org. That was like no gradient.
Not your usual experience for a Sea Org member.
Usually you have to work your way up, but yeah. But so I became the commanding officer. And Tina and I lasted about a year before we were removed. And the mission that came to remove us was Sandy Stevens, who's now Sandy Wilhare.
Yes.
And Fred Hare, who was my wife's brother.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Fred is another colorful old Sea Org member.
Yes.
But that was my wife's brother. Tina was Tina Hare before we married.
Okay. So that must have been kind of awkward having her brother come to remove her from post.
I know. It was kind of strange. So, so we got sent to the decks, which at the time was on the Athena,
okay,
another ship.
And where was the Athena at that time?
It was in Copenhagen.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Copenhagen Harbor. And so we became deckies on the Athena, which was an old fishing trawler. And did I send you a picture of the Athena?
I don't think so. I don't have that, no.
Oh, okay. And then I became Athena crew, and I learned how to be a steersman, a helmsman.
Okay.
Which is tricky because you've got this big wheel, like you see in ships, this big wheel that you're turning, and the conning officer will say something like, 5 degrees right rudder, and so then you go, okay, 5 degrees right rudder, sir, and you start turning the wheel, and nothing happens. You're watching the compass, and it's just nothing is happening. And so you're turning a little bit more, still nothing's happening. It's just right on there. A little bit more. Finally, it starts to move.
Yes.
Starts to move, and then you correct. But it keeps moving. It keeps moving. It keeps moving. It keeps moving, and you're like, oh my God, where are we going? And then you overcorrect, take it back the other way, and then of course it goes back, and the other way, and then overcorrect. So the ship is going like this through the water.
Yes.
Which is how a rookie helmsman is if the ship is doing that, because that's what he's going through.
Right.
Is overcorrection. So I finally got where I could just touch it and go tick, 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 5 degrees, and then you say 5 degrees right rudder you have, sir. Bang. And I got so good at that they made me the Condition 1 helmsman.
Nice.
Which means in and out of port,
I see.
So I was the best helmsman on the ship at that point, So I loved all that. We sailed up into the North Sea, up along the Swedish coast, which was just, it was just great. I didn't want to get back into the rat race at that point.
Yeah.
I just wanted to sail around. But I was going to be appointed as the flag banking officer of the advanced org.
Okay. And flag banking officer meaning
flag banking officer,
the head honcho over all finances
of the finances of the advanced org, and that is the person who, what they do is that they get, like Mike was saying the other day, they get $1 worth of income, and 80 cents on that dollar goes up to flag reserves, and they have to live off of the 20 cents that's left. And the flag banking officer is the guy who does that, who grabs all the money he can for flag and sends it off, and then the org has to survive on whatever's left. And I just thought, no way am I going to go into finance. It was the last post that I wanted. I just had no interest in finance, balancing books and, on and on. I was just like, no, I can't do that. But my friend Ken Delderfield, did you ever know Ken?
I did, yes.
Yeah, he was a good guy, and he was a good friend of mine. Everybody called him Deld.
Yes.
He was running the pubs org. He's the one. He took over from me as commanding officer.
Okay.
And he said, no way that Jeff is going to be the FBO of the AO. He said he proposed that I become the DSEMSEC at pubs.
Okay.
And that was approved. And I said, thank you, Deld, for bailing me out of that situation. There. Yeah. So I became the DSEMSEC, and I did all the promotion and magazines and everything else that we were doing. And that went on for a while, a year or so. And in 1975, Hubbard was forming a marketing unit aboard the ship because he was doing photo shoots. They were staging these scenes. They would have a script, a photo shoot script, and it would be a story about somebody going into an org or somebody getting training or something like that. And the idea was to use these photo stories to sell Scientology.
Okay.
And they had some photo stories that were for raw public, and some photo stories that were about auditing, and some about training and so forth. And he wanted to form, he had all these photographs now, and he wanted a unit to design brochures and stuff using all these photographs. And he sent a telex, and it said, or no, it was in the orders of the day, in the flag orders of the day. And he said, he's forming up this marketing unit, and he said, get Hawkins from Denmark. Like I was named personally,
By Hubbard.
Yeah. Get Hawkins up here for the marketing unit.
Yeah.
And so I was, yeah, okay, great. My senior at the time, who was Judy Ziff, had taken over as the head of pubs. And she was like, well, you got to turn over your hat, So I grabbed a guy that I knew could do it and had it up in about 2 days. And then I took off for flag. And I thought I would be flying into Madrid, which is what I did before, because the ship was in North Africa, in Morocco, when I did my training. So I thought, okay, well, I'll be going to Madrid and then on to Morocco. And no, I was flying to New York and then down to the Bahamas, and I was like, what is going on? Because the ship had crossed the Atlantic.
I see.
And was now in Curacao.
Oh, yeah. And so I have a picture here. There we go. Is that the right one?
There's Curacao with the famous bridge in the background there.
Yes.
And the Apollo is the big white ship down the dock. So that's where I went. I went to Curacao, to Willemstad is the name of the town there, and started working in the Dissent Bureau. And there were all kinds of brochures that had to be done. Some of them were for Scientologists, but also some of them were for the port of Willemstad.
Okay.
And they were for PR reasons, because, Hubbard was always trying to schmooze the port governments,
right,
so that they would look kindly on Scientology. So I became a part of that effort. And I think I sent you a photograph of the guidebook.
Yep, here we go.
Synagogue Guidebook. This is one that I designed. Hubbard had gone to this, this is a synagogue, the picture there.
Yes.
And it's the oldest synagogue in the Western Hemisphere.
Huh.
And it says 1654 was when it was founded. So that was like when the settlers were in Jamestown and so forth, and just beginning to settle the United States. There was already a synagogue in Curacao. So Hubbard did a whole photo shoot of the synagogue.
Okay.
Exterior, interior. And then I was handed all of those photographs and told, make this into a tourist booklet.
Yes.
So that was what that was, And I was doing, there was another one that was supposed to be a tourist brochure for Willemstad. And I had to, that was going to be an industrial brochure, because Willemstad is the biggest, I think, oil transshipment port in the Western Hemisphere. In other words, tankers would come into Willemstad and then transfer their cargo to another ship that would go to the United States. Mm. Because Willemstad had a deep port that those huge tankers could accommodate those huge tankers. And then the oil would be transferred to smaller ships that could go into the U.S. ports. Okay. So it was an important important transshipment port. And I found all this out because I was supposed to write what we were calling an industrial brochure, which was a brochure that the island could then send to companies and promote the port.
Right. Just for the purpose of maintaining good relations.
Yeah, and we were doing it totally because of port relations, and one day I had to go and meet with the Chamber of Commerce of Willemstad. And I was leaving the ship, and somebody said, and I had an old suit that I'd had for years and years and years, and it was a little ratty by then. So they said, no, you can't go like that. You have to get a proper suit. And I said, well, I don't have a suit, But there was a young kid who had the bunk above mine in the dormitory. And he said he had a suit, and we were about the same size. And so I borrowed this kid's suit.
Okay.
And that kid was named Mike Render. I told him the story, and he got a kick out of it.
That's awesome.
Right. So I said to Mike, I said, do you want your suit back? No, I gave it back to him. But yeah, so then I went and met with the Chamber of Commerce. We were designing this whole booklet and so forth. Never got used, to my knowledge, because shortly after that, we were told we were going to another port, and it was all excitement. We were told we were going to Sao Paulo in Brazil.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I thought, well, that's love to see South America, Yes. So we cast off the lines and so forth, and we were heading out, and it was announced, we're not going south, we're going north. because we're going to the United States. And I hadn't been back to the U.S. in years. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going home, you know?
Yes.
And we went to, I think, Bermuda. And we all got off the ship, and it was like, we're going to set up a flag land base in Florida.
Okay.
And we all went to Daytona Beach.
Yes.
Some of the crew went to the final location, and some of the crew went to Daytona Beach.
And this, of course, in the history of the Sea Organization, is the historical step of the Sea Org no longer being at sea.
At sea, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was going to be a land base. And I heard a couple of missionaries talking, and they said, well, you know, the city has an appropriate name. And I thought, So a few minutes with the Florida map, and I saw Clearwater, and I thought, that's it. It's got to be Clearwater.
Yes.
And I knew I was right, you know. So we worked in Daytona for about a month, I think. And then one day, everybody got on the buses. We're going to Clearwater. And that was the establishment of Clearwater as the flag base.
Right.
So
by this time, and what year was this?
This was end of 75, October 75, we moved.
Okay. And you were still in the marketing unit.
And I was in marketing, yeah.
Okay.
And I stayed in marketing, and we went to Clearwater.
Okay.
And which was great. It was, you know, I like being in the U.S. because you could get a decent hamburger, you know, and you know, occasionally see a movie or whatever if you had a day off, or go to the mall, whatever.
And and by the way, where was your brother now?
My brother had blown pubs.
Okay.
Like a year after we got there or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Gone to back to LA. And then he rejoined the Sea Org in LA, and he worked in the DSEM area of AOLA.
Okay.
And he was married at that time to his first wife. And he, where was I? Okay, so I was still working in DSEM.
Yes. In Clearwater.
In Clearwater.
Yes.
And then I became the senior magazine editor. So I was doing all of the magazines, Auditor Magazine, the Orgs Magazine, the Lower Org Magazine, the Advanced Magazine, which, you know, was quite a production at that point.
Yes.
You know.
I think we have a picture here too. I can add this. This is
me hard at work. Yeah, that was in Clearwater.
Yes.
Retouching something. I don't know what I'm doing there, but yeah, and we had to wear WOG clothes. Which is why I have a paisley tie on. We had to wear WOG clothes, which
meaning
none of us had. So
normal people clothes, not Sea Organization
normal people
uniform
clothes, because we were United Churches of Florida.
Right.
You know, and we had a whole short story, just like on the ship. We couldn't mention Scientology. We were, instead of Operation and Transport Corporation, we were United Churches of Florida. So we were already used to this drill.
Yes.
And you never talked about Scientology on the street or anything. If anybody asks you, you were United Churches of Florida and blah, blah. You know, that didn't last long. Pretty soon people find out that Scientology had infiltrated their downtown area.
Right.
And we started getting picketed, and you know, so all the noise started there.
Yes.
So, but you know, I was getting tired of just doing promotion to Scientologists, because I thought it was more important to get new people in. So I had this goal of doing a big campaign to non-Scientology public. And I think I mentioned that Hubbard had sent down what they called an advice, which was his orders, really.
Yes.
He said our marketing people should be studying blog marketing and advertising tech, which means just the normal marketing and advertising that's used in the world,
right.
Just professional marketing.
Real world marketing technology.
Yeah, real world marketing and advertising technology.
Yeah.
So I started studying that pretty seriously because I had this idea in my head that I wanted to do a big campaign to new people,
yes,
to non-Scientologists, to bring them into Scientology. That was kind of my goal to do. And I used to sit around with my friends. After work, we would go to the Lemon Tree restaurant at the Fort Harrison. That was the staff hangout after hours.
Okay.
And we would talk about doing a big campaign someday.
Mm-hmm.
And I was tired of being in flag management. It was being run at that time by Kerry Gleason as the CEO of Flag Bureau.
Okay.
And Kerry and I never got along. He was one of the people that had boomed Boston org in the early days.
Yes.
And he had done it with a huge stat push. And so that was his mode of operation. It was just stat push, stat push, stat push. Funny story, we had to do some posters one time to put up around the org, saying, and they were propaganda posters against stat push. Like don't push stats, get real production, don't just stat push. And we were doing these posters, and it was coming up to 2:00 on Thursday.
Right, which of course is the end of the week in Scientology. The
stat cutoff, right?
Yes.
And we were like, we've got to get these posters done before 2:00 so that our stats will be up. Right. And they were stat push posters.
The irony abounds.
Yes, so that's how seriously we took all of that.
Yes.
But Kerry was abusive. He would scream at staff, and he swore like a sailor, and it was just uncomfortable being around that kind of abuse, 24 hours a day.
Understood.
So I was like looking for a way to, one, get out of flag, and two, do the big campaign.
Yes.
Well, so this was it's got to be, I think when was the GO dissolved? That was in 81 or something?
Yep, early 80s.
Yeah, so the GO was dissolved.
Okay.
And CMON was taking over all of the functions. This was before OSA was established. CMON was taking over all the functions. And one of the functions was public relations.
Right.
And so a mission was going to be fired from LA to find a PR company that the church could work with. And so I was to be the missionaire, myself and Annie Alcock.
Okay.
Because we supposedly knew about PR somehow. So
not by any formal training, of course.
No, we're not. Nobody had ever trained us in it, but marketing, PR, same thing. So Annie and I fired out to LA, and we were briefed by Bill Franks, who was then the executive director international, on this mission. And we did the mission. We went out for a couple of weeks interviewing PR firms, making sure they didn't have any conflicting clients, like, big pharma, so
Yes.
forth.
And I think you'd mentioned previously, but maybe we just touch on that here. The need for that PR firm was what?
To do PR for the church.
Right. But didn't you mention that was because of the raid and they were trying to salvage?
Yeah, the raid
Yes.
and the jailing of the Guardian's office people.
Yes.
So Scientology's PR was in the gutter, basically.
Right.
And it was like we would go to these PR firms and say, we need you to fix the church's PR.
Yes.
And a lot of them were just like, nah, we're not going to do that.
Yep.
And we went to all kinds of firms, from the biggest to the smallest. We went to Hill and Knowlton, and all of these places. Not Hill and Knowlton, but the PR people. Finally, we found one that we recommended, which was a small PR agency run by Bill Witter, who had known LRH back in the day, which was a big plus point for him. And his company was called Dateline, I think.
Okay.
And they agreed to work with us, and eventually they were hired to do PR. And then Bill Franks had been in touch with a celebrity, Kathy Lee Crosby, who was a Scientologist at the time.
Okay.
And she was organizing a big anti-drug special on TV, which was to be called Get High on Yourself.
Okay.
And she had all kinds of celebrity talent lined up, Scientology celebs as well as non-Scientology celebs. And she had this whole program all worked up, this whole special with singing and dancing and on and on and on. So, and she wanted a Purif campaign to launch right when that special aired, to pick up on the interest in anti-drug. It was a Narconon campaign. But it was mainly a Narconon campaign. And so I was Annie and I were finished with that PR mission. So we were fired on a mission to develop a campaign for Narconon.
Okay. And this is still early 80s.
Early 80s.
Okay.
And I had so we had to do this campaign for Narconon, and I had pretty much carte blanche to call for staff or do this or do that. So I sent to Flag, and I told him to send my wife out, Nancy.
Oh, okay.
My second wife, Nancy.
Okay, here we go. I have a picture. There you go.
There we are, back in the day.
Yep.
And and they did. Nancy came out, and she became my research person.
Okay.
Because that was kind of always been her job, marketing research. So she did some research, and I worked out a campaign. And I had boards, presentation boards worked up, and we had surveys done, and we had all kinds of things. And we had done it in 2 weeks, which was like crazy, to put something like that together in 2 weeks. And so then I presented the campaign to Bill Franks, Kerry Gleason, and John Nelson.
Okay.
John Nelson was the COCMO at the time.
Okay. So all of the top...
They were They were all
Scientology's top execs at the time.
Scientology's top executives.
Yes.
Gleason was ED Franks was ED, Gleason was CO Flight Bureau.
Okay.
The three big guys, and they sat there in their chairs, and I gave about an hour presentation. They didn't move, no facial expressions, nothing. It was like there were three department store dummies sitting there.
Oh boy.
Just nothing. They weren't frowning. They weren't smiling. They asked no questions. And I just gave this presentation, the most bizarre presentation I've ever given, because they were just like that the whole time.
Okay.
And they thanked me, and that was the last I ever heard of that campaign.
Wow.
It was just dropped like a hot potato.
Yeah.
But I kind of had the bit in my teeth at that point, So I wrote up a petition, a CSW, to CMOint. And I said, I want to do a big campaign. And Hubbard had sent an advice saying that if you do advertising or you do a campaign, you do it to sell a book. You never just do a campaign to get the word around or create word of mouth. You never do that, which is all they do nowadays.
Right.
But Hubbard said, if you place an ad, you do it to sell a book. You got to sell a book.
Yes.
And he was clear that the book you were supposed to sell was Dianetics, because that was book one,
Yes.
And if you did a big campaign for Dianetics, then people would come into Scientology. So I thought, okay, and that was my petition, was I want to do what Hubbard said to do and do a big campaign for Dianetics in the United States to raw public, And I said, it'll take us probably about 6 months to research it before we're ready to launch, because I knew it was going to be a lot of research if it was going to be effective.
Right.
Unlike, because I knew what had happened with the Narconon campaign, we had to do in 2 weeks, a waste of time.
Yes.
So I said, I proposed forming a marketing research unit first to do all the research that we need to do. And that was approved. So I was, then I was a missionaire.
Okay.
And I was doing market research. It was myself and my wife, Nancy. And then we started to collect people, collect other staff. There was one young woman came in and she said, I heard you're doing a big public campaign for Scientology. I said, yeah, that's what we're doing. She says, I'd like to join your unit. And I said, good, sit down there.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy's your senior. You're going to be doing surveys. So there's your desk and so forth. I didn't know who she was. And then her senior came in like a day or so later. And he said, I'm sorry, but she's my staff.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, not anymore. Now she's working for me. And so we collected staff that way, just because people wanted to do that. They thought it was a good idea.
Right.
And so we formed a little unit, and we did. One of the first things that I did was, and this was totally illegal in Scientology, by the way, but I got a copy on a hard drive of our mailing list.
Okay.
The Scientology mailing list, which was about, I think at that time was about 100,000 names. This was supposed to be everyone who had ever bought a book, taken an intro course, anything.
Huh.
Right?
Okay.
100,000 people.
Yep.
And I took this disc to a marketing research agency. And I said, I want you to analyze this address list for me and tell me who these people are. They had the programs to do that.
Right.
Advanced computer programs that they could do that. Matching up address. I don't know how they did it, but they ran the list through their software, whatever it was, and they came back to me with a demographic profile of that list.
Wow.
Which was amazing to me.
Yes.
And this was a snapshot of who was in Scientology at the time. And I was fascinated with that. It was mostly college educated. And I think it was 18 to 35, 60% male, 40% female. Income, there was all these, they broke it out in many different ways.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is very interesting because this is my target audience.
Right.
This is who has joined Scientology and who is most likely to join Scientology.
Right.
If promoted to. So then I had a media firm to them, and I said, this is the demographic I'm trying to reach. And, so then they would put together TV buys for me. And we had done a couple of TV ads using a company in LA.
Okay.
And one of them was called Mountain Climber. And it was a pretty cool script. It was these two, man and a woman, are climbing a mountain. The man slips and she rappels down to help him and get him back, and then they climb the mountain together, and it ends up with them both on top of the mountain at sunset. And we had a helicopter that was flying around the mountain.
Okay.
Beautiful finishing shot.
Right.
We shot it up in Ojai in California.
Nice.
In the mountains there. Professionally shot. We had our director of photography was a guy named Laszlo Kovacs, who had done 5 Easy Pieces, and he had done Easy Rider. This was a pro, we had a crew of pros that were shooting this. And the ad was great. It's a beautifully shot ad, nice message, And we did a couple of other ads. So these were the ads that we were going to use. And we got a media buy that was going to hit the demographic that I had found out, And of course, we had done surveys, tons of surveys. So the script was hitting all of the buttons that we had found, be more self-confident, this and that, read the book Dianetics.
Yes.
And so we launched with these ads in fall of 84.
Okay.
Oh, and the other half of the equation, this is very important, is we had to get the books into the bookstores.
Right.
So that when the ads launched, the books were there. And I had no idea how to do that. And what was being done at the time was if an org wanted to get books into bookstores, they would go to the bookstore and say, you have to take our books,
Yeah.
And the bookstores were so sick of this, And so the feedback we were getting from the book industry, I had hired a guy as a consultant named Len Foreman, who had formerly been marketing director at Simon and Schuster.
Okay.
So he knew everybody in the industry. Then so when he went to talk to these people, that was the feedback he got is, oh, Scientology? Oh, we don't want anything to do with those people. They're awful. They come into our stores and, they try to bully the store owners into taking their books,
Yeah.
and they said, we're sick of that. We don't want anything to do with Scientology. So I reported this back to ASI.
And of course, ASI is Author Services.
Author Services, which is on paper is supposed to be Hubbard's agency, his
Yes.
author agency. But in fact, at the time, they were running all of Scientology from ASI.
Yes.
And David Miscavige was the chairman of the board, ASI. But he was ordering the entirety of Scientology. So I reported this to the meeting where David Miscavige was, and EDN was there, and COFB, and everybody who was anybody was at these ASI meetings. We had a weekly meeting about the campaign.
Okay.
The order went out immediately. No org staff member is to go into public bookstores and try to sell them books. Just don't. Stay away from the bookstores.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, wow, that got results. So the big book chains, they appreciated that, And Len says, he says, you know me. He says, I wouldn't be involved in anything flaky. He said, this is a different group, and they're serious about running a campaign. So trust me on this. So they were like, okay. So they would place their orders. So by the time we were ready to launch, we had, I think it was 250,000 copies of paperback Dianetics out into bookstores, which was, it was it's called a sell-in. That was a decent sell-in.
Yes.
So we had, 250,000 books out there in the stores already waiting.
When previously there'd been no Scientology books or Dianetics.
No.
Yeah.
There had been, no Dianetics book, nothing into the bookstores.
Yes.
So that any advertising they had done in the past was useless because they go in the bookstores, the book's not there.
Right.
So books in the stores, we launched the campaign, we run the TV ads, and I was keeping a statistic, because of course you got to run on a statistic, but we would get a weekly report from Walden Books, a weekly report from B. Dalton Bookseller, and a weekly report from Ingram's, which was the biggest wholesaler of paperback books in the U.S. So I would get those three numbers, I would add them together, and that was my stat.
Yes.
That was a reflection of how many books had been sold nationwide.
Okay.
Of course, it was only a fraction of the real number because we didn't have reports from everywhere.
Right.
It was just those two chains and that one distributor. Whatever their sales were for that week, that was counted as total sales.
Okay.
Well, I think the first week it was 500 books or something like that. And we were like, man, okay. But it immediately went on to the Walden Books bestseller list.
Okay.
Which I think it was at number 5 or something, which had never happened before.
Mm-hmm.
So this was like, whoa.
Yeah.
We were on a national bestseller list. So, and then Hubbard sent down another advice. And he said, because I was always worried about people would just cancel it and shut it down and say, well, this isn't working.
Right.
Hubbard said, no. He said, you have a winning horse here that is not being fed enough oats. Those were his exact words.
Okay.
And he said, pour it on. He said, a campaign like this, he says, it takes it takes a while to build momentum, which is what I've been saying the whole time.
Right.
You got to keep at it. You got to keep going. And he said exactly what I was saying, I've been saying. These things are a slow build. They take time. And you've got to just have the patience to keep at it and keep at it and keep at it. And he said, you have a winning horse. It's not being fed enough oats. So keep going. So I was like, boy.
And so,
couldn't have had it.
Yeah. And at this time, so you're still in Los Angeles in the marketing unit at this point? Okay. And was this before or after you mentioned that story about the missionaries that came in?
Oh, boy. Well, interestingly enough, I had to do a lot of fighting to keep the campaign going.
Yes.
And the ironic thing is that I had to fight with Scientology management, which just seems strange.
Right.
Given that, it was a success and continued to be an even bigger success. The people I was having to fight were Scientology's own executives. And that was the first battle, sort of in that war. Edie Int, which was Kerry Gleason at the time, had sent a mission to my unit. And it was two women. It was Aledia Warren, who was married to Peter Warren at the time, and Debbie Vincent.
Okay.
And I won't use the B word, but they were very unpleasant women. And they come marching into my office. They've got their Sea York uniforms on. And I demanded to see their mission orders, And I think you mentioned that's a no-no. Nobody's supposed to read the mission orders. But I insisted that I should read their mission orders, and I did. And it would have basically ended up with dismantling my unit and stopping the campaign.
Okay.
And I thought, no. So they wanted to do an inspection of my unit. I do an inspection. So we went all around my little unit, which was just 2 rooms at the time. And there was a supply closet where we had all the paper and the pencils and everything. And they went in there and they were looking at what the supplies were and this. And I closed the door and locked it. Locked them inside.
And of course, for context, these are people that are senior to you because they've been sent in to handle your unit.
These are Sea York missionaries.
Right. Yeah.
Sent by Edie Int,
Yes.
So, but at that time, I was really being run by ASI. And my senior at ASI was Fran Harris.
Yes, who I knew. Lovely person.
Who was at the base, and I think still is. But at that time, she was at ASI, and she was the one I would report to her, and then she would report to Hubbard.
Mm-hmm.
And Hubbard was just as pleased as punch with what we were doing, He thought this was great, the whole idea of doing a campaign, and he would always have suggestions and things, and then Franny would relay that to me, and I would get that done, whatever it was, and then the report would go back up the line. So Franny was my de facto senior. She was running me in all practical senses.
Yes.
And she gave me just unlimited air cover, because she knew what this campaign meant to LRH.
Yes.
So I lock them in the closet. I go to the phone. I call up Franny, and I told her what was happening, his mission and so forth. And she goes, "I'll call you right back."
Mm-hmm.
And so I hung up, sat there for 5 minutes, hearing the bangs and the screams coming from the closet. Phone rings. It's Franny. she says, their mission has been recalled. I mean, that was the kind of power that ASI had at that time,
Yeah.
It was just like the mission was recalled.
Yeah, meaning it was canceled, and those people were going to be in big trouble, right?
Yeah. So I went to the closet, unlocked it, let them out, and I said, "You've been recalled. Now get the F out of my office." Which felt pretty good at the time.
Yeah, I'm sure. I would have loved to be a fly on the wall and see the looks on their faces.
That was not a good mission for them.
No.
So yeah, we launched, and Hubbard was pleased, and he was like, "You got the winning horse that's not being fed enough oats." So we kept it going, and the sales were like, they were increasing bit by bit by bit, but not over like 1,000 books a week, maybe.
Okay.
But we were getting on more bestseller lists, So then, and I got to thinking about the ad, and I was thinking about there's a policy that Hubbard wrote about the mystery sandwich. That one.
Yes.
About public respond to a mystery. So you create a mystery, and you point them to where to find the answer. And I thought, that could make an ad. And I first thought of it as a print ad, like a newspaper ad.
Okay.
And I laid the whole thing out, had a big Dianetics book in the center. And then I had these questions around the edge. And it said, how can you gain self-confidence? See page 32.
Mm-hmm.
What's the cause of war? See page 95. And I had all these questions around this book. And I thought, this is going to get people, because it asks them all these questions, which were based on surveys, things that they do want to know.
Right.
Like how to have more self-confidence, that sort of thing. And then it just points to the book, classic mystery sandwich, as Hubbard said.
Yes.
So I was working with a guy at the time who had been creative director at Chiat Day, big advertising firm.
Okay.
He was a Scientologist, and he had been in advertising. He'd been a creative director. And so I was working with him, and I showed him this ad, and I said, what do you think? Do you think this would work? He looked at it, and he said, yeah, that's good. He said, why don't we do that as a TV ad? TV ad, really? Mm-hmm. He said, yeah, you ask the questions, 1, 2, 3, and then you show the book and say, this is where you get the answers. I was like, oh, okay. So I did up storyboards for this ad, and we were having our weekly meetings up at INT at this time. I had INT clearance.
Okay.
And I went up, and CMO INT was in Del Sol at the time. That was
okay. And here, I'll pull up the picture you gave me of the base from that time. This is the Gilman Hot Springs headquarters of Scientology.
Yeah. So I was cleared for the base.
Okay.
I don't know how, but somehow I was cleared for the base.
Meaning security clearance.
And went up every week for a meeting.
Yes.
And Del Sol is right sort of in the middle there. But, and so I presented this ad in storyboard form. And everybody was like, we don't get it. That's not a TV ad.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody got it. It was like, oh, that's not a TV ad. I don't understand. What? So I went back down to LA, and I got with Rick, and I said they weren't getting it, and so forth. And then I had an idea, and I said, why don't we just go ahead and make the ad?
Yeah.
Because we didn't have to film anything. No, we just had 3 cards and a picture of the book against the exploding volcano, which we had already made for another ad.
Yes.
So we had the end graphic. All we had to do was put in 3 cards, and we had an ad. And then I thought, what do we got to do for music? And it's got to have some kind of music backing or something. I had this idea of kind of electronic music, kind of a staccato electronic music, because I wanted it to be edgy and dark.
Yes.
And so, not big and splashy, but something that would sort of echo the feeling of these cards coming up with the white letters having a question. And I just wanted a staccato electronic music thing happening. So I went to Jeff Levin.
Yes, and of course we know Jeff. He did the music for the intro and outro for this channel.
There you go.
Small world.
No, he's a brilliant musician and composer.
He really is.
And he had a studio at the time called Juniper Studios, and he was working with Chris Maney. And so I went over this. I showed them the rough cut of the ad. Said, I just want something electronic and a staccato and kind of mysterious. And they came back with that classic Dianetics music, the
yes.
Music.
I'll include a link. I found it on YouTube, some of those ads.
Did you?
Yeah, so I'll send it to you just to make sure, but I'll include it just so people understand better what you're talking about, because it was historic at that time for what it was.
Yeah. So I had the music, and then I needed an announcer. And at the end, it was gonna go question with the page number, and then the book, Dianetics by L Ron Hubbard. Get it at Walden Books or B. Dalton Bookseller or whatever, or wherever books are sold.
Yes.
And I wanted James Earl Jones, and I found this announcer who could do that kind of voice. He was a big bearded guy, barrel chest. His name was Great Person.
Okay.
And interestingly, his main line of work was doing all the voices for the Looney Tunes cartoons.
Interesting.
So he did all of those voices. If you listen to his answering machine, he had all Looney Tunes characters giving his answering machine.
Nice.
So we went into the recording studio, and he said, "What kind of voice do you want?" And I said, "I want the voice of God." So he did that. Dianetics, and it was so perfect.
Yeah.
So we added that in. We had the whole ad, and I took the ad then up to Int for the next meeting and played it for them, and they were like, "Oh, now we get it. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's an ad. Oh, now we get it."
And of course, none of them had been doing any of the studies you were doing on advertising, marketing. They had no idea what they were talking about.
No, but they know they liked it.
Yes, no, absolutely.
They could see that it had impact, which
right.
is what I was going for. I was, because this was the 80s, and everything was kind of colorful and frothy and, la, 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 la on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, no, let's go dark. Let's go really dark with this ad, So it was sort of counterintuitive in that way. So we had this ad all ready to go. And about this time, I was working with I had a media director who was a Scientologist.
Okay.
And she knew a lot about buying media and how to do it and so forth. And she came to me one day and she said, this was 1986 by now.
Okay.
She came to me and she said, "There's this new thing that we should think about, and it's called cable television."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Oh, okay, what's that?" She said, "It's really new." And she says, "It's really cheap because nobody's buying it yet." Because Nielsen, which was the ratings company that rated TV shows,
mm-hmm.
Nielsen hasn't given it a rating yet, so it's cheap. and it's national. We had never run a national campaign before.
Okay.
We had only run individual markets, like let's do LA, New York, Chicago, which was called a spot buy. So we had only been doing spot buys, which is all they do nowadays, by the way.
Right.
Is spot buys. So we had never done anything nationally because it was prohibitive price-wise.
Right.
To buy a national commercial on ABC, NBC, any of those was just prohibitive. But here was this new thing, cable TV. Nobody knew anything about it. And I said, well, what are the demographics? What is its audience? And I looked at its audience, and it was, I think 18 to 34, primarily male, college educated, and it just went point for point right down my demographic analysis of who our target public was.
Right.
And I said, oh, this looks perfect. And she said, great, do you want me to set up a pilot? And I said, no, I want to put our entire budget into this cable TV.
Wow. And what was your budget at that time, by the way?
Oh, gosh, what was it?
Just ballpark out of curiosity.
We're getting, it was in the hundreds of thousands every week.
Okay.
And it was adding up to, millions over a period of time. Like Hubbard said, we weren't getting enough oats,
right.
So pour on the oats. So I said, no, we don't need to pilot this. I know it's going to work.
Yep.
Because it's going exactly to our target public. And I said, and let's put on the new ads, the new question ads. So she said, okay, we'll do that. It was a gamble.
Yes.
But I knew it was going to work. I knew that this thing was going to work. So we got that all set up. We had books in the stores. Again, we had done a big sell in to the book trade for this campaign. We launched, boom. And the book sales went vertical that first week.
Wow.
Just vertical. And they kept going up week after week after week. It was one of those, and I didn't rescale the graph. I just started pasting it across the ceiling. It was always fun.
Yes.
And we were selling, tens of thousands of books every week.
Wow.
And we were on the Walden Books bestseller list, the B. Dalton bestseller list, the Ingram's bestseller list, and then local bestseller lists. We were getting on them, and it was just going and going and going. It was unstoppable at that point.
Wow.
And the sales were just, I think our highest week was 30,000 books a week, in a week. And that was through Walden Books, B. Dalton Bookseller, and Ingram's distribution.
Wow.
30,000 books in a week.
Yeah, that's amazing. and I think sorry, were you going to say something?
It was about that time we got a commendation from Hubbard.
Oh, wow.
Which I still have a copy of, about everyone involved with this campaign is highly commended, and blah 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 blah.
Nice.
So we were riding high, and we just kept at that, and I was continuing to research and fine tune this thing, because I found out, because we would do what's called a flight of ads, 3 weeks of ads, and then the sales would dip, and then we would run our next flight and it would go up again. And I discovered that the pattern had to be 3 weeks on and I think 2 weeks off. because after 2 weeks, the stats would go down, start to go down too much. So after 2 weeks, we would goose it again, and so the stat would go up, 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 drop a bit, then up, 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 drop a bit, then up, 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 but trend-wise, up all the time.
Nice.
And we fine-tuned the programming that we were running and so forth, which was a very subjective process, because I would give the demographics to the media firm and then say, give me a media buy, and they would give me a media buy, and it would show all the programs and the times that the ads were scheduled for. And I was going through that one time, and I saw Saturday morning cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, what? No. And I went down to the media firm and I said, I don't want Saturday morning cartoons. And they said, well, it reaches and so forth. I was dealing with idiots, and I said, I don't care what, the correlation is. I don't want to talk to people who watch Saturday morning cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not interested in promoting to them. That's just not what I want to do. So I went through the media buy, item by item, with a fine-tooth comb, crossing out the programming I didn't like and okaying the program I did like, because I would look through the thing and it would say Twilight Zone. And I would go, yes, absolutely. We got to be running on Twilight Zone. Old classic movies. Yes, let's do that.
Mm-hmm.
Science fiction movies or something. Yes, we got to do that. And it was all very subjective. It was the sort of things that I would watch and that the people that I knew would watch.
Yes.
So it was a completely subjective analysis, but I would look at the programming and I would go, oh, they're doing a rerun of Casablanca. Yeah, we want to be in that one. Science fiction theater, totally. Got to be there all the time, And so I was cherry picking the media, which was driving the media company crazy, but, I was paying the bills. So we did that. But then I was fine tuning it so it was going to exactly the people that I wanted to reach.
Nice. Yep.
So that,
and sir, I think this is probably a good point to end our part one here.
Oh, okay. And part one.
Yes, but for the end, for our wrap up, I'm going to pull up your book cover that you gave me and have you tell me about that and as well about the other books that you read for our listening. Oh, there you go. Awesome. And here, I'll add it here. There we go.
That's the whole, for anybody who wants the whole story, it's all in there, all 37 years of it.
Awesome. And I will link to this as well. And tell me about the other two books that you wrote as well for wrap up purposes of part one, please.
Okay. Yeah. I started a blog. This was back in 2010, 2011, and it was called Leaving Scientology. And I would write an article every couple of days for that. And then I sort of finished. I sort of had said everything that I wanted to say. And so I just decided, okay, that's enough for that blog. And I took all what I considered to be the best articles from the blog and made them into a book.
Yes.
Which is, and I publish it only on Kindle.
Okay.
Because, I self-published this book. And then when I was selling the books, I found out that most of my orders were Kindle.
Yes.
So, and I think you guys found the same thing.
Yes.
So for the second book, I said, I'm going to just do Kindle because, it cost me $10,000 to print this.
Right.
Which was money I didn't have, obviously just coming out of the Sea Org.
Right.
So I had borrowed that money, and then out of my profits, I paid it all back. And so then Now the sales are all profit, basically.
Yes.
So with the second book, I went totally Kindle. It was called Leaving Scientology.
Nice.
And it was kind of the best pick of the crop of all the articles that I had done.
Yes, and I'll link to that as well. And your third book I want you to mention, because in the interview I did with Catherine Olson, she mentioned how incredibly helpful it was to her in unraveling her mind after escaping from the Sea Organization.
I think it's an important book because Scientology is all about mind control, about controlling people's minds. And in thinking about it, and writing my book and writing my blog, I came to realize that Scientology ethics is the thought control system of Scientology.
Yes, you're absolutely correct.
And I thought, well, this is going to be an important thing to tackle. So I got in touch with Tony Ortega. And I said, and I told him about, what I was realizing about this ethics. And I said, how about I do a series of essays about the ethics technology? And he said, great. So I still had a copy of the book, which I had kept for just that reason, because there was something there that I wanted to examine further.
Yes.
So I took it chapter by chapter and wrote an essay about how that was a mind control tool.
Yes.
How that particular chapter or part of it was a mind control tool.
Deconstructing and unpacking what ethics technology does to your mind.
Yeah. So it was point by point through the book, deconstructing it. And Tony published those as a series of articles on his blog. And then I took all of those and made those into a book.
Nice.
Called Closing Minds. And I designed all of my books and all of my book covers.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
I'm a designer. So
yes.
Hey.
and like I said, I will link to all three of your books.
Great.
And in part 2, we'll get to the rest, we'll discuss the later years and what happened and how you eventually got out. How about that?
Yeah. And it's sort of all downhill from this point in my Scientology career.
Well, depending on your perspective, uphill in that here we are talking about it now, right?
Yeah. So now it's all cool. Yeah.
Yes. Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for your time today, Jeff. I will look forward to speaking with you soon. And until next time.
Great. Until next time.